Okay, I want to go back before I bring in my next guest, Meg Kilgannon, Senior Fellow for Education Studies. Before I bring her in to talk about other educational issues, I want to go back and kind of tie a bow on this conversation we're having with Chad Connolly about the RNC. I have in my hand the memo that was sent out to members of the RNC by the chair, Ronna McDaniel. And I'm just going to read few things here from you, for you. This, and I'm quoting, okay, so I'm quoting. The RNC hiring this new staffer does not mean we're advocating for any policy or in RNC platform change on these issues. Now we're talking about the Pride Coalition, member of the Log Cabin Republicans and others. As you know, the platform committee will meet at the Republican National Convention in 2024 to decide our platform. That committee is made up of members each state and territory and elected at the local level. All right, a couple of things. I've been a part of that for years. I've been on the platform committee multiple times. And in fact, the last 3 platforms, I've had a significant part in writing them. But when I say that, the platform actually already shows up written by the RNC. The RNC writes it, and then you have a convention where members, 2 from each state, a male and a female, go. And I guess that'll stay the same. I don't know. That policy might change, where they don't do male and female anymore. I don't know. But then we have to amend it. It's a legislative process. You have to offer amendments to change it. So it's not like you have a clean slate. You have a high hill to climb sometimes based upon what they give you. And we've had to work diligently. But here's something I've learned in my quarter of a century in politics, is that personnel is policy. We saw this in the Trump administration. You know, President Trump put good people in place, and guess what happened? We got good policy. Now, he didn't do that initially. The first year is a little slow getting started, had some bad rhinos, and we got rhino policy. If you're putting people who are advocating for an agenda that goes along with the LGBT agenda, like we saw, like we were just talking about, gender neutral bathrooms, pronouns, all this crazy nonsense, guess what? It's going to be reflected in your policy. It goes on, the memo goes on to say, quote, and it certainly doesn't mean we're trying to make any changes to the core values of our party. We are actively committed to fighting the radical left on culture issues and standing up for religious liberty, family values, and Republicans of faith. Well, you know what? Your actions have to match your words. I'm just going to tell you, there have been times, there have been leaders at the RNC that I've worked very closely with. The previous, Reince Priebus was good, worked very closely with all elements of the conservative movement and worked with us on the platform, was sensitive to the issues that we raised. I'm just going to tell you, I'm not going to give a single penny to the Republican National Committee if they're hiring people that are advancing a pride agenda. That's foolish. I tell you what, if you get a call from the RNC and their fundraising arm and they ask you to make a donation, tell them, just say, sorry, call the Pride Division. Get your money there, because I'm not giving you 1 red cent. It's the way I feel. And we'll see if the RNC responds to the concerns that are being raised. By the way, go to TonyPerkins.com if you'd like to weigh in on this, and you can communicate with your RNC officials and ask them, what the heck is going on? I mean, what are you, Democrat light? We already have one party that's pursuing these policies. Why would you? Insane. Speaking of these policies, a new poll by Coefficient, a polling firm, I think out of Kansas, taking a look, a survey, post-election survey in Virginia, while jobs, and I'm quoting from their piece, while jobs and the economy registered as the most important issue among all voters, education and critical race theory were cited as having the biggest impact on your vote among the largest segment of voters. Governor Terry McAuliffe's statement on parental involvement in schools at the September 28th debate was also a significant factor for voters. Here's the numbers. 54% of voters said McAuliffe's statement was a factor in their vote. 64% of voters deciding in the last month said it was a factor, including 50% who said it was a very significant factor. Listen to this. 81% of voters deciding in the last week said it was a factor in their vote. Voters who viewed this statement as significant broke for Youngkin 88-11. I cannot remember in my time in politics where education has been a good issue for Republicans. It's because of how radical the Democrats have become, how radical the left has become, to my point, and why you see the RNC going down the same path. Mind-boggling. Here to talk more about what is happening in education, Meg Kilgannon, Senior Fellow for Education Studies here at the Family Research Council. Meg, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, it's great to be back.
Okay, so I just went over some of these numbers. This issue of education was huge in Virginia.
Yes, it really was. And we had some election reforms that were put in place by the Democrat-controlled House of Delegates and signed by our Democrat governor. I wonder if we hadn't had so long a session of early voting and if things weren't so polarized, I wonder how many more voters would have broken for Youngkin at the end. I mean, I wonder how many early voters regretted their vote and wish they could have changed it in the end.
I thought the same thing. That is one of the dangers of the early voting is that, people really aren't paying a whole lot of attention, and you get the barrage of information at the end, and you see the pressure building. And you're right, this was one of the last debates that this statement came out, and then of course it got lifted over the following weeks. So I thought the same thing. But fortunately, there weren't as many people who early voted in this year's election as they did last year.
Right, thanks to the pandemic reforms from last year, reforms, quote unquote. Yes, so the election issue is really been the gift that keeps on giving to Republicans because the Democrats can't seem to stop tripping over themselves and making these unforced errors, like saying that they don't think parents should have anything to do with children's education.
Right.
Who would think?
Yeah, and here's the other thing is that, we're talking about election reform and all the craziness happening in the elections. This is an example of why we can't get discouraged and say, oh, it's rigged and we're not going to be able to do it. We actually engaged in the early voting, the ballot collection, which was made legal in Virginia. If the left was going to do it, we were going to use it. If we use it effectively, they'll quit using it. But we had churches collecting ballots in the churches. And every little bit made a difference. And of course, this was the issue. Now, speaking of this issue, we're seeing stuff pop up elsewhere with this same crazy wokeness agenda. I mean, we've got in New Hampshire, a high school student suspended from a football game for allegedly expressing his views that there are only two genders. Yeah. I mean, since when do you get in trouble for telling the truth?
Well, and since when does a conversation you have with friends on a school bus on the way home turn into getting suspended from the football game or anything in school? This is
1984.
Right. This is the anti-bias agenda, quote unquote, where they are turning kids into activists, and they're setting up these programs where you can fill out a bias incident report on the website at your school, and you can do so anonymously. I don't know if that's the case at this school in New Hampshire, but these are the kinds of things that parents see happening in schools across the country that make them think, what is going on?
Do they get a brown shirt when they do that? I mean, that's
one.
Essentially what we're doing. I mean, we're turning these kids into snitches for big government.
Well, first it's your friend on the school bus, and then it's your parents, right?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, this is where you start turning children against their parents and having them report on what their parents say. But this is not, again, these are not isolated incidents. You go over to Connecticut, where elementary school students in West Hartford, Connecticut, are being forced to undergo social emotional learning through equity lenses. And of course, there they have a director of equity advancement that oversees this whole agenda.
Yes, and the social emotional learning has been a red flag for family groups for a long time because these are areas that are formed in children by parents and families, right? And we send kids to school to learn ABCs and 1, 2, 3, not to learn about equity initiatives and transgenderism. But when the CARES relief money, the COVID relief money went into schools, they had a whole line item for social and emotional learning that they are funding. So with that amount of money going into school systems, you're going to see even more of these kinds of programs cropping up all over the country, even in places that you would never suspect. So parents really need to be vigilant in knowing what's going on in their child's school.
It's a really good point, Meg, because some may say, well, I'm sure they learned a lesson after what happened in Virginia. I don't think so. I don't see them being apologetic at all. I don't see them even being ashamed. I don't see them being able to blush. I see them pushing forward with an even more radical agenda, as you said, with even more money to do it with.
Well, the education establishment is in very much of its own bubble. They've been reading their own press releases and drinking all of their own concoctions in there, and they have forgotten what those of us who live in the real world think and believe and want for children and families. And so we're really excited that so many school board members, so many school board candidates ran in the last cycle, and many of them won. And they're going to be bringing a breath of fresh air and injecting a worldview that is new to the system, unfortunately, but they're going to be injecting their worldview into a system that desperately needs another set of facts to operate from. So,
yeah, and in just a minute, I'm going to get you to let our viewers know about a special event coming up Friday that they can participate in. But I just want to provide a little more color commentary, G-rated, for this curriculum that's in these schools. I mean, this is again, this is just one report, and these are not isolated. It's happening elsewhere, as you said. It's happening in places you would least suspect it. But lessons through this social justice, social equity, lessons are supposed to teach students in kindergarten. I mean, this is when they're learning how to tie their shoes, through 5th grade about social justice standards. Now, that sounds okay, I think. I mean, you could make that be okay, but this includes identity, diversity, justice, and action. So we're teaching kindergarten students, 1st graders, how to be activists on these radical left policies. I mean, we're literally sending our kids off to these schools funded with our tax dollars for them to be turned into activists that will work counter to the parents and the values that we're trying to instill in our own children.
Unfortunately, that's the case. And the books that they're using to teach these social emotional learning lessons, they're picture books with, a gender non-conforming children, in them. It's very confusing for 5-year-olds. They're putting adult problems onto children at a very young age, and it's political. These are political ideas. And this is the thing that parents don't want. They don't want this in school. They send kids to learn ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, not about how to, what your wardrobe choices should be.
How is this going to make us more competitive with China on the global economic stage? I don't think it is, quite frankly.
I don't think it is either.
Okay, so this Friday, a special event coming up, online training, still focused on this issue of education. Tell our listeners and viewers about it and how they can be a part of it.
Yes, so we're going to do a school board elections roundup, and we're going to have 2 panels. It's on Friday, November 19th at 1 o'clock Eastern, and the first panel will be groups, parent groups, and PACs, political action committees, that engaged at the school board level in terms of organizing and advancing candidates, funding candidates. We're going to hear from those groups and how they feel like this election cycle went and what they're going to be doing next time in 2022. And then we're going to hear from candidates. We're going to hear from 3 candidates who won, and I'm trying to get someone who lost to join us too, because there are many lessons in running a race.
The problem is we can't find many that lost.
Well, a lot did win. It's true. It's
because
very true.
So many won. This was a great cycle for those who were willing to step into the arena.
The stories are just fantastic. Tony, I have such a wonderful job. I love my job because this last week I've been talking to these candidates all across the country that won their races, and they are just the kind of people that you would hope would run and win. They're people who've run small businesses. They're people who have a background in accounting and who wondered to themselves, gee, do I really have anything to offer the school board? But then, as one woman said today, I started watching the meetings and I said to myself, gee, I can do better than that.
All right, very quickly, we're almost out of time. How can people find out more about it?
Go to frcaction.org/schools. You'll find a link there to sign up for the webinar, and we would love to see you on Friday. And if you can't be there Friday, we'll post the event at that site soon.
All right, very good, Meg. Always great to talk with you.